I hope you enjoyed the sample intro story. As I noted a moment ago, we'll now be covering why it's important to be able to deliver an effective intro story, how to prepare, and the importance of practicing and feedback. While we won't have time to cover the practice and feedback part today, I have made resources available online that you can access at the end of the video. So, why is an intro story important? Well, people form a first impression of you within the first 7 to 30 seconds of meeting you. And 69% of the time, people are forming a first impression of you before you've even spoken. So, it's important to be intentional about this. Influence and likability. People buy from other people. You want to be likable and come across as though you are of like kind. That simply means that you don't want to create dissonance. Rather, you want to create resonance. And you want to come across as though you are relatable. You understand where the buyer is coming from. You can put yourself in their shoes, and you're building trust quickly. Decision making. People base decisions on emotion first and then back it up with logic, data, and facts. So it's important to relate to your buyer on an emotional level. Finally, differentiation. It is noisy out there. You do want to stand out in a positive way. You want to show that you understand the buyer and you understand a solution that will work for them. And you want to do this in a way that makes a positive impact. If you're not standing out, someone else will. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. You never know when you might come across your buyer or when you might interact with someone who knows your buyer. So make each moment count. Now, what is an intro story exactly? Well, it's a brief description of your solution tailored to the buyer's problem, with the goal of sparking interest and evoking emotion. The end goal is to land the next interaction. Your buyer's probably not going to make a purchase decision in this moment, so you simply want to keep the process moving forward. And what is that process? The buying process from the buyer's perspective. And when does the intro story occur? Well, the reality is it could occur at any moment in time in this process. 80% of B2B companies are making purchase decisions using a buying committee nowadays, with over 22 different stakeholders. So you never know when you're going to come across one of those stakeholders in this process. And B2B buyers are 57 to 70% of the way through the research that they do on vendors before they even reach out to the sales team. So I would argue that it's super important to show up prepared in the early stages when they're identifying the problem, building awareness, and doing research on vendors. Now, just like the buyer is doing research on you, you want to do research on them as well. You want to show that you understand them and you know them. In enterprise sales, this often happens at the start of the fiscal year during the account planning process, which can continue throughout the fiscal year. You want to show that you understand the company, its financials, as well as its mission and values. You want to show that you understand who their customers are, what their customers care about. And you want to show that you know the competition and where the buyer fares against the competition. It's also important to show that you understand the problem and that they're facing, maybe the top 2 to 3 problems, as well as any strategic initiatives that they have. You also want to show that you understand what happens if maybe that problem isn't solved by a particular moment in time. And does your solution maybe solve one of those problems? If so, who are the potential stakeholders that would be involved in that buying committee? The decision maker, any potential influencers, the champion, and get to know what's important to them. Admittedly, this can feel like a lot. And if you do your homework, it will pay off. If you don't cover enterprise accounts, I still highly encourage that you take this approach. Identify the top 10 high potential customers in your territory and do research on them, or do research on the industry vertical that you cover, or possibly the buyer personas. What's important is that you're understanding your buyer and seeing things through their perspective. Now, what makes a good intro story? Well, first, it's concise. It's 30 to 60 seconds or less. It's relevant to a material business problem and or a problem that a person has maybe at a company that they need to solve. And it also comes across as confident, but not arrogant. It's authentic. You want to let your true self shine. Maybe tell a personal story, show conviction. And you also want it to be personalized and tailored to the audience. You want to make sure that it's not about you, it's more about them. You might even have a different interest story for different stakeholders at your buyer. And it's also emotionally intelligent. You want to show that you're self aware of how you are coming across. And you also want to be in tune to how you're coming across to the buyer and be able to adjust in the moment. What are the fundamentals of the intro story? Well, it's quite simple. There's an introduction that's followed by identifying the problem and presenting the solution. You then want to deliver value and show what you know and validate. You get to show off that research you just did. And then there's a call to action. The introduction. You want to share your name, your title or role, and the company that you work for. You might consider including something about you that is relevant to the buyer. And you might consider sharing your company's mission or values, again, if it's relevant to the buyer. You also want to cater to the audience in terms of style and approach. The way I approach a CTO is quite different from an IT system administrator. You also want to pay attention to nonverbal cues, things like eye contact, posture, tone of voice, pace of voice, hand gestures, and facial expressions. 93% of what we communicate is based on nonverbal cues, not the words that we say. Earlier, I shared that 69% of the time, people are forming a first impression of you before you've even spoken. This is how. You also want to build rapport quickly by using the buyer's words and their language. For example, using the term shopper instead of customer. You also want to mirror body language where appropriate and not in a creepy way. You might simply lean into the same location of the Zoom screen as to where your buyer is located. In the sample intro story, I shared my name, my title, and the company that I work for, and I added a couple of extras. I shared that I'm an enterprise account executive, highlighting that I cover enterprise level customers. I also shared that I'm part of the retail industry group, putting attention on the fact that Salesforce specializes in the retail industry and might even have solutions to cover this space. I then shared that I have a 10-year history in IT, both at Google and Big Five Consulting. I assumed my hypothetical customer was the Gap, a company that I covered previously when I was at Salesforce. I know that at Gap, 50% of the buying decision comes from the IT department, so I want to be relatable in this way. Google is a highly admired tech company in the Bay Area and also worldwide. Gap admires Google and is also headquartered in the Bay Area. Gap often relies on Big Five consulting companies to do implementation work after a software purchase decision is made. So now you want to identify the problem and present the solution. You want to share how your solution solves the buyer's problem. Keep in mind that people don't want your product, they want what your product can do for them. In the sample intro story, I did this when I shared that we help retailers reduce support costs and increase shopper satisfaction by simplifying the post purchase experience. The solution is simplifying the post purchase experience of the shopper. I also added a bit of value in by highlighting the reduction in support costs as well as increase in shopper satisfaction. I specifically chose those items because I know that Gap is hyper focused right now in this hypothetical scenario on reducing costs overall. So I thought that was an important thing to highlight. Deliver value. Here you want to show why your company for this solution instead of the competition. You want to share the ROI or value that the buyer should expect to receive after deploying your solution. You might want to consider sharing a client testimonial or customer success story. And don't forget those nonverbal cues, rapport, and BU. In the sample intro story, I shared that companies are experiencing a 27% reduction in support costs after deploying Salesforce's Service Cloud solution. I chose this metric because I know that Gap is focused on reducing costs at the moment. I could have shared a retail success story, and there's only so much time. So I had to choose wisely, and I tailored what I chose based on the audience. Now you get to show what you know and validate. You get to showcase the research that you just did. You want to show that you know this company, this particular buyer, and you understand the problem that they're trying to solve. Don't forget about those nonverbal cues, rapport, and BU. And you also want to validate. Is the buyer leaning in or backing away? What are those nonverbal cues telling you? And how can you adjust in the moment? In the sample intro story, I did this when I shared my understanding of Gap's problem, that they were seeing increased demands on their call center as a result of COVID, and an increase in support inquiries coming in from online purchases that also resulted in unhappy shoppers. I also went a step further by sharing my understanding of how they were attempting to solve that problem by improving productivity in the call center and getting shopper satisfaction back to where it once was. Notice that I'm also using in this moment words like shopper and retail. I'm doing this specifically to be relatable to Gap and what's important to them rather than using my language. Call to action. Now, you always want to show up prepared with a call to action, desired outcome, and intention, and you want to be willing to adjust in the moment. You want to get curious, get some feedback. I know that I said that the intro story should be 30 to 60 seconds, but the reality is no one's got a clock ticking on you. So go ahead and lean in and ask, is what you are sharing landing? I did this in the intro story when I checked in and I said, did I get that right with regards to the problem that they're trying to solve? Based on what the buyer shares, then you want to move into the call to action. In the sample intro story, I assumed that the buyer did lean in. They confirmed that I got the problem right. So I felt comfortable and confident in moving into my originally planned call to action. I shared what it was, which was to um, understand better their challenges that they're facing, as well as offering up some value. I offered to share what other retailers are doing to solve this problem. I also included that we will see if there's a mutual fit. I didn't make any assumptions. I wanted the buyer to feel like they're part of this interaction. And finally, don't forget nonverbal cues, rapport, and BU. And don't leave that next step to chance. Get it on the calendar. That is super important. I did this in a sample intro story by asking, do you have 30 minutes for a conversation over the next couple weeks? Once I got confirmation of that, I asked, great, what's the best way to schedule? I'll leave you with this. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Show up prepared, and success will follow. Thank you for your time today. Feel free to reach out. I provided my contact information here. I'd be happy to answer any questions or have a conversation. And feel free to download the practice guide using the QR code here.